When the Ebola outbreak hit West Africa in 2014, the region was just pulling itself out of years of armed conflict, including civil war, that devastated healthcare infrastructure, stunted education, and opened the door for the ability for the virus to spread rapidly. And I was actually there in the summer of 2014 while it was playing out. It originated in Guinea and then quickly spread to Sierra Leone and Liberia. And unlike previous cases of Ebola, it didn't stay isolated to rural areas. It actually hit the cities and with highly populated areas and was able to jump rapidly from person to person. So while international aid was flooding into the country, thousands of humanitarian remote volunteers were actually creating digital maps from satellite imagery using a web platform called OpenStreetMap to guide these international humanitarian aid workers on the ground there. And while we can tell that there's a road here and dozens of buildings, you wouldn't be able to put that into your phone and you wouldn't be able to navigate the area effectively. So we need to turn this data into information. And by doing that, the organizations can plan an effective response. They can figure out how to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. Instead of going down 3 dead ends before they get there, they can do analytics, for instance, how many people are living in this area based on averaging a certain number of people per household. It's very essential to conducting contact tracing operations. So contact tracing is figuring out who's exhibiting Ebola symptoms and then monitoring everybody who's come in contact with them recently for 21 days, which is the incubation period of Ebola, to make sure that they don't start developing symptoms and spread it to more people. This is one of the most potent ways to contain the outbreak. So on the left here, you can see what kind of data was available before these remote volunteers started creating digital maps. And on the right, you can see what it's like after. It's a comprehensive digital data set with roads classified differently to detail what kind of cars can drive on them. If it's paved, is it made out of sand or clay? A lot of times these roads get washed out in the rainy season. You can only drive about 5 miles per hour. This is essential for conducting a humanitarian response. So you can see, again, on the left, it's pretty bare bones, and on the right, you have every single building, all the residential roads, all the primary roads, and you can get to people as quickly as possible. So when I got back from Ghana, I started hosting mapathons, or mapping parties, where we teach people how to use satellite imagery to digitize roads and building footprints so that they can be used by any organization, open source, and we're part of the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. This is a heat map of some of the areas we worked in West Africa. On the left there, you see Sierra Leone and Guinea, and then to the north a little bit is Mali, where there was an isolated outbreak that was stopped quickly. On the right there is actually Nigeria. We were working on a different project for a polio vaccine campaign there. So this is really important for humanitarian response. And during October of 2015, there was a massive earthquake that hit northern Afghanistan and Pakistan. It was a 7.5 magnitude earthquake, and it was in rural areas and mountainous regions. And to make matters worse, winter was setting in with snowy conditions, cold rain, and the Taliban had armed forces in the area restricting movement. So tens of thousands of people lost their homes, and they were braving the elements outdoors, and we need to create these maps as quickly as possible so that first responders could get to them very quickly, provide them with the much needed aid. So you can see here, while looking at a satellite image, it's really difficult to tell, are there any people living in this area? Probably not. I couldn't really tell by looking at this scale, but that's what these mapping parties are about. That's what remote volunteers do. They look kind of closer, that you can actually see in the middle of there's a tiny house complex, and on the left, it's just satellite imagery. But on the right, these buildings have, we've digitized polygons around them. So they're geolocated, we know where they are, we know how many buildings are there, and you can figure out how to get to them as quickly as possible. At UVM, we've hosted about 15 mapping parties working in as many different countries, and some of the recent projects we've worked on are the recent earthquake in Ecuador, as well as a HIV medication distribution campaign in Mozambique. But we're not the only ones mapping. There are people all around the world hosting these mapping parties. And this is actually in Kathmandu, Nepal. And they were, before the earthquake that happened there in 2015, they were creating detailed digital maps of the Kathmandu Valley. And because they had this information, it was able to be used as a base map for operations there. And not only were they creating digital maps, but they were using field papers to update the names of roads and the use of buildings. For instance, was it a school or a temple or a hospital? These are all very important pieces of information when conducting a humanitarian response. So when the earthquake did eventually happen, they had a good base map, and then thousands of people around the world working for the humanitarian OpenStreetMap team improved these maps and made them as good as they could possibly be within the time frame. And a massive, massive international aid campaign flooded the country and was helping out. So this is a paper map, because you can imagine in Nepal there wasn't really much internet access after the earthquake. So you actually had to print it out and use it to plan your operations. So this was actually a Canadian disaster response team that was doing this. And not only can you use this for disaster response, but you can use it for recovery after the fact. So damage assessment, as well as entrepreneurial innovation, and hopefully get these people back on their feet as quickly as possible. And that's really our goal here. So.